want good morning, good day, and good evening. This episode has been a nightmare to start. I didn't realize when we were supposed to be doing it, but we're here now. Robert McQueen, welcome to the show. Just give a brief introduction of yourself before something breaks again.
Hi there. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm here in sunny Cambridge in the UK. I am, a couple of different things. So I'm the CEO.
You've worn very many hats, that's for sure.
We have hats, yeah.
Many
so
hats.
I'm the CEO of the EndlessOS Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, Endless has been going for just over 11 years now. I joined about 8 years ago, and in 2020 we switched over to being a non-profit.
Mm-hmm.
So we have kind of grant-based funding. We work on digital access, digital equity, so helping people overcome barriers like device affordability and availability of infrastructure, so connectivity to the internet. Does software work for them? Does it respect their privacy? Can they learn stuff? Does it speak their language? And trying to come up with answers to all of those so that people can kind of access this 21st century knowledge economy. Mm-hmm. As part of that, we do EndlessOS. So we can bring together a bunch of apps and content and games and things into one Linux-based system, which is GNOME-based, and it's kind of batteries included. You don't need the internet. Everything's built in. Mm-hmm. So that actually took us to contribute and develop and actually do a lot of work directly in GNOME. Mm-hmm. And I'm on the board of the GNOME Foundation as the president. And actually, as part of that work, working with GNOME, we helped to start up FlatHub because we kind of wanted to see a thriving app ecosystem in EndlessOS, but also more widely in the free open source desktop in GNOME, KDE, Mint, Cinnamon, everything else. Long list of things here.
I was curious about how
three hats.
I was curious about how that connection to FlatHub came about, because I've known you're one of those people like George where I knew about your work, but I didn't know about you. I was curious how that connection to FlatHub came about, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Because FlatHub, when did FlatHub come about? That would have been how many years ago now?
2017.
2017. Oh wow, it's been around for a while.
Yeah, so 5 going on 6 years. Yeah, so Endless took a really early bet on a couple of things. Firstly, on OS tree. Because the first idea behind Endless was actually a bit like the Samsung DeX or the Motorola Ultrix, that you would have a mobile phone that if you plug it in, you would be able to put a keyboard and it would go into a TV. Mm-hmm. And we kind of figured out that basically the economics on that didn't work. Like it didn't because a phone that's powerful enough to do that costs more than an inexpensive phone and an inexpensive computer. Mm-hmm. So actually, that was the idea. And we're like, oh yeah, smartphones will be able to do this. But actually at the time that Endless was starting, they weren't able to do it. And it didn't add up basically to get a $600-700 smartphone out to people so that they could save money on buying a PC. You're like, okay.
That was 10 years ago, yes?
That was going back around 10 years. Yeah. So Endless actually started working on its own ARM devices. This is when Raspberry Pi was just appearing. So we made our own hardware.
Okay.
So this is the Endless Mini. But this is going back in history. But we had our own OS that ran on our own devices. And so we were having to put together like the ARM platform support, port the desktop onto these lousy graphics drivers from ARM, like all of this stuff, back in the annals of history. Mm-hmm. But we wanted a really reliable kind of base system. So this idea that Android and Chrome OS and many systems have, where you have this core like immutable base system. You upgrade from OS version 7 to OS version 8. There's no packages. There's no Windows update. There's no rebooting. Like it's just like it runs and it works. So we had OS tree in kind of EndlessOS from the very start. Kind of 2015, 2017 time. So 15, 16. And we've been running with that since then, kind of, uninterrupted. We started off with Ubuntu, we switched to Debian at some point. So you could issue a command and switch distro. You switch from 32-bit to 64-bit, and, just rolling forwards. So that made a lot of sense for the core OS. Mm-hmm. And it made it very reliable, and it meant we could test one thing, we could ship it out to people, we could just run a couple of branches, one for Intel CPUs, one for the ARM devices that we had. What it didn't solve for us then was applications. So, the state of the art then was your choice of, PPAs, COPRs, like all of this stuff. And like, yeah. So we actually had our own app bundling system, which was a terrible thing that put zip files in /endless. And it was like, it was bad. Let's just forget that. So we needed to replace it with something that was a bit less nuts.
Yeah, sure.
We saw some of the early work on what became Flatpak, but it was XGG app that Alex Larson was doing.
Yes.
I thought, okay, this is cool. This is a direction that makes perfect sense because we already had the immutable base system. We were already in that place of wanting the applications to be kind of contained. And the other thing that Endless had is we had very much two teams. One that was working on the core OS itself, and one that was working on our SDK and apps. So what we called knowledge apps, that offline copies of Wikipedia, and health data, news, like you name it. We had different pipelines and different ways of formatting that. A lot of investment into GTK to enable different layouts and constraint-based layouts and things that later went into GTK4 to build the kind of graphical language that we wanted to in our SDK. But those guys were like, modifying the widget set and the applications, and they wanted to release every 2 or 3 months. And then the OS team were like, well, actually 6 months would kind of make the most sense for us because we can get the new kernel and the new GNOME release and whatever. So
and 6 months was a well-established model at that point with like Ubuntu and things like that.
Yeah. So that was the cadence of the upstream that they were working with. Whereas people who were putting patches in GTK and then landing stuff on top of it and then wanting to ship it a month later, and obviously so the apps could use the new stuff we were doing. Just the idea of being able to separate those and say, okay, great, we have a different release cycle. This is the OS. It's going to be pretty bulletproof. We're going to release it when it's ready, keep it tested, keep up with those upstreams. And then the apps can then just pull in different versions of runtimes and SDKs and things. So the Flatpak model made a lot of sense for us because it allowed us to basically give these teams their own cadence. Before, the SDK team would be trying to pull the OS team forward and the OS team would be trying to pull the SDK team backwards. And actually, just switching to Flatpak allowed us to kind of restructure the team even further. So we were able to separate the apps and the SDK team because the SDK team could just keep releasing SDKs, and then the apps team could choose whichever SDK to base on. So actually adopting Flatpak changed the org chart in Endless because it allowed us to develop all of the components at their logical speed. That you kind of I think of it like a Fourier transform. This is probably a really bad analogy, but they're like different frequencies. Like an OS is quite a low frequency thing.
Right.
It has some high frequency overtones like hardware support and things you kind of need to layer in. And then developing your widget sets is like a kind of middle frequency, and then your applications are like another high frequency. So
what?
Kind of needs you.
I think you're onto something. That is a really bad analogy.
I'll get my coat. But yeah, so they're logical cadences for these different things.
No, I get what you say.
Using confinement and being able to put runtimes in sandbox things allowed us to deliver things at their kind of natural pace. And we had a whole bunch of third-party applications. Like we had some folks from Megalia who were like rebuilding debs into this weird endless format. And we're like, okay, well, we don't want to do that anymore. Actually, if these are third-party applications, we kind of want there to just be like an app store and like a place. We don't want to build an endless app store and try to go around getting people to submit their whatever open source pool game or whatever and put it into our store. That's not value add for us. What we want to do is just make this better for everyone, and it'll be there for us. It'll be there for everyone else who needs it, and we'll get the most reach and the most contributions from having that. Just be its own thing. So I think we kind of just took over. There was like a GTK Hack Fest in London or something, and Alex Larson was there, and I went and crashed it. And we ended up spending half the time talking about basically Flatpak and how we could start FlatHub and kind of what would be necessary for us to have like a kind of logical destination for people who wanted to publish Flatpaks and people who wanted to find them and download them and install them. So that's how I ended up doing work on FlatHub and kind of why it makes sense for Endless to have me spend my time doing that.
Do you recall how long XG App and then Flatpak have been around since before FlatHub became a thing?
Not without googling. At
Okay, no,
least
fair enough.
3 years, maybe 4. So I think there were there were a couple of attempts at kind of XDG app, and I think there was something called Click before it.
Yeah, I do recall this.
Alex was noodling around. Yeah, so I think he kind of worked on it and stepped away and came back to it a couple of times before it kind of got to a level of maturity. Like, oh hey, like we have a runtime and you can actually build some GNOME apps on this. This kind of works, and it kind of picked up a bit of momentum kind of when we jumped onto it as well. Because I think we kind of smashed ahead and made some stuff work and worked out some of these funny details around OS tree and yeah.
OS tree nowadays has picked up a lot of steam with things like vanilla. Try that again. Vanilla. Why do I trip over that one? Vanilla OS. There we go. Blend OS and Fedora's doing their thing with Fedora 39. They're going to have like the official images as like a part of like an actual part of the thing they're distributing. What was the state of OS tree like back when you first started getting involved with it? Was it anywhere near as powerful as it is today, or where was it?
I think at its heart, it was like a very well engineered thing that it wasn't too hard for Endless to pick it up and say, okay, great, we can actually take this into production. I'm pretty sure that Endless was the first into production with an OS tree based OS.
Oh wow!
I mean, the company that I worked for before Endless was Collabora, and they were working on.
Well, you didn't just work for Collabora. It's not just
okay. Well, Collabora worked for me, right?
Yeah, you were a co-founder of Collabora, so that's...
yeah. But we did some consulting work for Endless before I left Collabora and joined Endless. So some of the internal R&D stuff that Collabora was doing was based around OS tree, and Endless was kind of the first customer that we set up OS tree for, and it just worked super well for what Endless was doing. And I'm sure that Collabora's got some other OS tree stuff going on, but I don't keep track of every last thing that they're doing. But certainly in the desktop space, EndlessOS kind of got out with OS tree first. And at that point, it was kind of mostly, it was from GNOME Continuous. So that's where Colin Walters had worked on the kind of continuous integration, this build system to try and move away from JH build and have a system that would just produce binaries of like, this is the latest kind of head of everything that's going on in GNOME, just to make the integration and the testing, on this thesis that if it's not being built, then it's not being run. And if it's not being run, it's not being tested. And if it's not being tested, it's lousy. Basically, so how do you collapse that entire pipeline down to like commit and then runnable binary, or even runnable desktop, or even runnable OS? So GNOME Continuous was working on that, and OS tree was basically a side effect of just trying to build an efficient kind of layered build system with caching and binaries and reusing stuff. So I had all these properties that made it really great for managing the bootable OS. We actually never used any of the build stuff. EndlessOS was always built by basically just taking Debian and putting it through a wood chipper and then just getting all the binaries out. Debian's a great way for arranging everything neatly if you like describing software in text files. But there's lots of people who are great at that, and they do all of that, and then you can just show up and like, okay, thanks, put the binaries in and carry on. I'm kind of post distro at this point. It doesn't really matter to me what the distro is. It's like, okay, there's this thing that makes binaries. They do some security. It's lovely. Thanks for the installer. Okay, great.
Well, especially if you're dealing with a lot of flat packs, like the underlying distro doesn't really matter for the most part.
Yeah, it's actually really freeing. Like we seeing things like Fedora and Silverblue that put together a GNOME desktop, and they do that using RPMs and the stuff that they're doing. The RPM OS tree stuff is really cool, just because it kind of solves one of the problems we had at Endless, that basically it was a one-way transformation. So we had Debs in the build system. We have OBS, the kind of open build studio from SUSE with various patches to make it work properly with Debian, because Debian's special. But it's not RPM based, right? So there's a little bit of impedance mismatch. So just trying to get all that stuff to work and then dumping it out into an OS tree. There's kind of like a hidden command on EndlessOS that kind of like puts the Debian back into the OS tree a little bit and makes it all writable. And then you can just use apps and just grab stuff. And obviously this is like, breaks the seal, voids the warranty, like abandon hope, all ye who enter. But for developments and just making incremental changes and testing stuff, it's really handy. RPM OS tree kind of like systematizes that. You're allowed to add RPMs into your base system, and then you still have something that RPM OS tree can understand, it can upgrade, it can do the rebases for you and things. So that's super cool stuff, and I can see why it's found like a good kind of match with CoreOS and the cloud stuff that Colin Walters, division of 2,000 engineers or whatever is doing now at Red Hat.
Well, one of the things so EndlessOS doesn't just have like the distro itself. There's also this endless key thing. What is that? I saw it on the page. I didn't really understand it completely.
Yeah, so that comes from kind of a change in our philosophy, moving from a startup. I say startup, but it ran for 6 or 7 years. But certainly, a kind of investment-backed for-profit company where our idea was basically that we'd solved all the problems in EndlessOS, and then if you got EndlessOS, then we would be getting all of the solutions out to all of the people who use EndlessOS. So it was kind of like a sort of winner-takes-all thing. Like maximizing stakeholder value. Like you can get your content and your apps into our OS, and if you're running our OS, you're getting everything that we've kind of thought of, which makes sense for a kind of investment strategy where you want to have a nice graph that goes up and to the right, and people shower money in, and it's great. In terms of a nonprofit, where actually we don't specifically care about people using our product, we care about the outcome of people using our product. So we care about, are people accessing learning resources or playing games to teach them stuff? Are people able to use their computer offline? Are people able to trust their desktop? So these questions are kind of, they're at a meta level. It's not just build the product, ship the product. It's more to do with kind of just untangling some of the threads of what we're doing and working out what's the logical way to get our work on the desktop to as many people as possible. Actually, just getting people to ship and to use EndlessOS is not the easiest way to do that. Going to GNOME and then spending our time and effort, researching and helping to contribute, and the stuff that Georges has been doing. And we've had various designers working in the design team and actually kind of helping to research and improve the GNOME desktop for everyone. That takes longer, probably costs us a bit more than just putting some patches. I mean, it's a near-term, long-term thing. In the long term, going upstream saves you money. But in the short term, if you want it to look just like that, it's quicker to just patch it or add an extension or something. And Endless is kind of zigzag between those. But this idea of taking everything that we were doing and saying, okay, great, to get this desktop out to as many people and make it as usable as possible, there's some, I don't know, tens of thousands of EndlessOS users, but there are probably some tens of millions of GNOME users, right? So we can go into a much bigger audience if we take our work over there. And we kind of applied the same logic to all the other things we were doing as well. So, we had these applications and a whole pipeline for downloading websites and putting them into applications and things. We thought, well, if we support that on different platforms and not just EndlessOS, then we can extend the reach of that idea that you can use storage and kind of offline content as a way to correct for internet availability,
right?
Whether that's infrastructure or cost or reliability or any combination of those. So it's just about kind of taking the different ideas that Endless had, everything built into one box, and just saying, okay, how do we logically take that idea out to more people and deliver more impact with that concept? So that's why some of the things are kind of playing outside of EndlessOS, and we still have EndlessOS that brings everything together kind of in a sort of serving suggestion from us.
So you've been involved in EndlessOS for how long now?
7 years.
7
Probably
years.
Just about to come up to 8. Yeah.
So
I suppose I started a little bit before I started because I was working as a consultant. So it's probably 8 at this point, but certainly 7 as a member of staff.
So had you always been interested in doing something that has the sort of effect that EndlessOS has? Was this something that you realized you wanted to do later in life, or how did you sort of make your way to doing this? Have you thought about this question before? Is the better place to start?
No. I mean, if you'd asked me 15 years ago or 20 years ago or something, I would have said that, free software is going to change the world. And as long as everyone gets a written copy of the GPL along with their television, then, their life will be amazing. And, working in Collabora for 10 years, and, we would go into these tech companies and they would be doing the most ghastly things with their software, and their strategy would make no sense. And they would ask us to come and solve their problems for them. And we're like, well, your problem is your strategy makes no sense. Your SDK doesn't work. Your developers hate you. Product's not that great. You're marking it wrong. You're a little bit late. Your competitors are faster than you. And here's the project you asked us to do. And we would get paid. We would do this great work. We would put patches in GStream or Wayland or whatever. But then eventually you could kind of see that you're kind of building the, another terrible analogy, whatever. But, this square is green. This is working. And we've delivered that, and we've done a great job, and we've got, a great team working on it. But everything else is just like on fire, and it's never going to work. So you could do a completely successful project, deliver some really amazing technical work, get paid for it, pay the team, keep the lights on, and still know that it was going to affect nothing, basically.
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter whether we optimize WebKit in this TV, right? If we do a great job of that, it's still a web browser and a TV. And effectively, no one wants a web browser and a TV, but everyone has to have one because everyone else has got one. So they could just license Opera or, get Brave to put some like crypto mining in your TV or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because everyone's just going to turn that off and never connect their TV to the internet because no one actually wanted smart TVs. But, and yet smart TV, whatever, pays this money to Collabora and do these projects. I think, well, even though the source code to this TV is available, functionally, no one reflashes their TV.
Right.
Or to a first approximation, like 0.0000.
Yeah, there's going to be one person who's like, I've reflashed my TVs. Like, we're not talking about you.
I went to the office and I asserted my GPL rights and I got the bootloader and I have now installed Manjaro on my television or whatever, right?
Yeah.
All power to that person. But in the grand scheme of things, I was just thinking, I've been very lucky in life. I'm here in Cambridge. I studied in Cambridge. Nice house, lovely family. There's many things that have gone well for me, and I'm sitting on top of a lot of kind of privilege and opportunity that so many people in the world don't have. And so I kind of wanted to find a way to, not just make it about the software and the source code and things, but make it about, in a sense, the ideology underlying that. Like, why do we care about people being able to get the source code or trust their computer or whatever? It's to do with empowerment. It's to do with accountability. It's to do with what Endless talks about, digital agency. And so this idea of are you controlling technology or is technology controlling you? And these are kind of much bigger questions at stake. Do people know how computers impact their lives, or how decisions that affect their lives are made using computers? Do people know how they're done with AI or machine learning or whatever? And even like, there's a whole thing there of people researching and using and creating stuff, and actually understanding how it works is like a separate research stream. So there's a research team at OpenAI who are using like an older version of GPT to explain how the newer version of GPT works, this kind of stuff, and that's choosing your benefits application or whether you get credit or how your kind of healthcare request is being processed through the system or whatever. So just technology is this big thing that just happens to so many people. And so this idea of empowering people with kind of accountability and understanding just became much more important to me as I realized, like, I'm very lucky in that technology has brought me all of these great things, but also I understand a lot about technology and how it impacts people. So this idea of just taking that out and kind of trying to improve the opportunities that people had and improve the kind of trust that people could have in technology.
That was a good answer.
But hey, if you want Twitter on your fridge or a web browser on your TV or whatever, go for it.
I don't. I really don't.
No one ever did, it turned out.
I saw this post, I think it was like a month or so ago, where someone was like, they're getting ready to have a barbecue and they couldn't because the barbecue needed an update. It needed to connect to the internet and do a system update, or they couldn't turn it on. It's like, no, it just cooks food. I don't need a computer in this. Stop.
No, please stop. I mean, yeah, I have friends who's they have a tap in their office that has like software, and they it wouldn't give them water because it needed like an over-the-air update.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Oh, that's an I love it. So one thing I was curious about, so you are the CEO of the EndlessOS Foundation. What I understand that being a position, but I have no idea what that entails as a job. What do you actually do in this position? Like, I have no idea. I don't think anyone has an idea what a CEO does. They just have this, like, the CEO is just this person that exists.
I just say you've described my Monday morning. Like, oh my God, what am I doing? Functionally, like day to day, I'm managing the leadership team in Endless. So we've got different departments that report to me. So we have an engineering team that does sort of technology and product and design stuff. We have a kind of program outreach team. So we have a VP of programs, and we've got people who go out and talk to partners and try and set up partnerships and deployments where people will use the stuff that we build, and we'll help them and they'll understand it and roll it out in different communities. And we have a commercial team that's working on opening channels for our laptop financing program. So we did some pilots in the US, and now we're kind of trying to build some new, build and scale some pilots in Guatemala and Mexico. So there's very recently we have a chief of staff, but before that there's operations stuff, so finance and our kind of people team reporting into me. So there's managing stuff. I think there's also kind of making our strategy kind of work and make sense, and that's kind of ongoing conversation between kind of our founder, Matt Dalio, and kind of the philanthropy team that kind of funds us, and our board and our leadership team, and trying to kind of synthesize these different inputs and figure out like what is a good thing for us to do in terms of our programs and our partners, what delivers impact, what do we think is cool and worth doing from a product and an engineering perspective, what do those different stakeholders think is going to work and what do they want to do. So it's kind of an ongoing conversation of kind of hearing and figuring out these different inputs, and then kind of updating the plan and setting the goals for the team, and then helping to lead the team to achieve those goals. And you know, all of those kind of trade-offs of management, of like stepping back and letting people solve the problems, or figuring out when people need more specific support and how I can step in or how I can bring people in to make sure that the team is kind of productive. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but a bit of operations, a bit of strategy, a bit of finance, a bit of management, a little bit of just leadership by saying like, we should go over here because it seems like the best thing to do. Kind of some combination of those.
It certainly gives me a better answer than I had before. I said I didn't know. I understand that CEO existed as a position, but I never bothered to actually look into it. I think most people just assume the CEO is just a figurehead that doesn't do anything. So look, that's as good of an answer as I could expect.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what Zoom level you set. Yeah. I mean, there's one Zoom level where like I go to a lot of meetings. I occasionally write some documents. I comment on a lot of documents. Sometimes I open a spreadsheet. There's a bit of Slack, and then I'm pretty terrible at email, but that happens somewhere in the day as well. But yeah, it's all about just trying to get everyone to understand the goals, understand what we need to get to the goals, making sure they have it, and making sure that we all think it's a good idea and we're all moving in the same direction.
Right. Well, let's shift direction over to GNOME. So I presume that you had been involved in GNOME for a while before you became the board president. How long had you actually been, maybe as like, even just using GNOME or doing like development work? Like, how long had you actually been involved in GNOME in some way?
I mean, certainly over 20 years.
So I was the start of GNOME, basically.
Yeah, not long after. I mean, I think the first version I used was 1.2. Oh, so yeah. Go back a while. I remember the exciting transition to GTK2 and how that broke everything. But I originally came from the Debian community as a kind of a package maintainer, and I had a file server under the stairs completely unnecessarily, and I was running Samba, and I had KDE on it, but I didn't have enough RAM or something. I don't know, I can't remember. Or I don't know. I had a Red Hat 5.2 CD, so that was what got me my first copy of Linux, and then I wanted KDE, but I couldn't get it, and so I switched to Debian, and then found this KDE, and then I ended up back on GNOME because that didn't work either, something like that. But I've been using them, 25 or something, I don't know, something like that, years, from very early on. And I remember Xamarin being really cool and exciting when it came out. And like, I can get like a shiny GNOME with extra monkeys. I'm sure there was a business plan as well, but it was all about the monkeys, really. And all of that stuff. And I was a teenager, and that was just exciting stuff happening, and I could just download the cool software and have a fiddle with it. But I actually started developing on what was then called Game, now called Pigeon, instant messenger stuff. And it's that's what kind of led me into some of the conversations that we got in contact with Nokia, and this is around DevConf in 2005. And they were doing this crazy Linux open source phone, not phone, tablet thingy. And they had a really cool strategy, which was basically just to go find open source communities and individuals who were working on stuff that seemed useful to them. And then setting up these contracts with them to basically, go out and see what they could get and bring into their platform from people who were already working in the space. So Collabora just kind of replicated that model in the sense of connecting to all of these different open source developers in different technology spaces and setting up kind of a business model around solving the business problems using open source community and setting up this kind of bi-directional kind of contribution and being able to reuse the open source stuff in the technology space. But yeah, I was already working on GTK stuff then. And I think when we set Collabora up in 2005, that's when I kind of showed up to GNOME, ended up sort of helping to maintain some dbus bits and pieces, and I think trying to convince everyone to use telepathy, everyone's favorite instant messaging abstraction framework. I'm also kind of post messaging abstraction. I don't think you should do it. Gatewaying is terrible. Multi-protocol UIs are really hard to get right. Probably just picking a protocol and using it is easier. But
so consider
I was young.
Before we get into the Collabora stuff, because I don't want to talk about that as well, what initially drew you to Linux? Because surely there was a point where you weren't using Linux then. Going back a few years now, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I had Windows on my computers before I had Linux on it, and it was a combination of two things. I think it was mostly Star Trek role playing, but through a couple of different routes. Yeah, so IRC real time role playing games, and trying to set up, is it MUDs or mushes or these kind of text based multiplayer things that would run like on some BSD server and everyone would telnet in, and that just building and running those meant I spent a lot of my time like telneting or maybe SSHing, I don't know, into these shell servers and trying to run that stuff. And also then spending a lot of time trying to customize my desktop so that it looked like there was some like shell where you could put your own, basically describe your entire desktop with like pix maps and like hot zones and like relocate the tray components and just replace explorer.exe because that was lame. And Windows just wasn't ready for me. I just couldn't do those things on on a Windows system. So it's a combination of those two just got me into using kind of Unix stuff, and then I just wanted to keep learning about servers and how they worked. I printed out a whole bunch of the Linux documentation project stuff. So I'd go on vacation with my parents and like print out 100 pages of like reading the like how to set up your Linux print server. I was very exciting as a teenager, as you can see.
Well, it's worked out for you today, hasn't it?
Yeah. My parents didn't have to worry about me staying up too late drinking. It was more, just on IRC.
Staying up too late reading Linux documentation.
Yes.
I like to ask people what their story is for getting into Linux because it's always a different answer, but that one's extra different.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say you can dig around and find some of the like websites for the Wayback Machine for the role playing games that I was running.
So Collabora came about in what year was that?
That was 2005. So
2005.
that's the year that I graduated from university.
Oh,
And
oh.
I had a job offer from Intel Research to go and work on Zen.
Okay.
So the Cambridge Computer Lab had a what was called Intel Upstairs, the research team who had a kind of wing of the building. And I actually interviewed there and I had a job offer there. And then I met these Debian folks in the pub who were like, oh yeah, we're going to this like Debian conference and we're going to go meet with Nokia and talk about this like VoIP stuff. And you want to come along? So yeah, we designed some software on a napkin, like pitched it to them. And they're like, yeah, that's great. You know, come back and start next month. Like, oh, okay. We're going to use dbus.
So you turned down a job at Intel as you were just leaving your study to go and start a thing with Nokia that you didn't know was going to become, you know, what it is today. It's just, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it's like, you know, I didn't have that much to lose. Like, if this doesn't work, I could probably figure out, I can go get a real job.
Yeah, fair enough.
And yeah, that's been true for 20 years. If it doesn't work out, I'll go and get a real job. I'm still here.
Well, nowadays, a lot of people recognize the name Collabora because of the work that they've done alongside Valve on like improving KDE, improving things for the Steam Deck, things like that. But what was it like in those early days? Besides this Nokia contract that appeared out of nowhere from a napkin, what sort of work was, obviously can't say anything that can't be said, obviously, but like what sort of work was being done back then?
Well, in the sort of early few years, I mean, we had this really great kind of honeymoon period with Nokia, and they were kind of going from their 770 internet tablet, and then they were kind of gradually tacking towards producing a phone OS, and the Nokia N900 being like a really proud moment for Collabora because we had stuff in the media stack, the graphics stack, the desktop compositor, the messaging and calls. Like, you know, Collabora was all over that. And behind each of those things that we were doing with Nokia, we were kind of building a team and a capability inside Collabora that we were then trying to find additional opportunities. So Nokia was kind of our what's the kind of like flagship client that allowed us to grow the team and the capability. But we could also see like that Nokia was kind of weird. Like they seem to have this like very internal kind of land grab, combative kind of approach. You know, they had like multiple branches of Symbian OS. They had multiple different open source operating systems internally. Like they had at least 2 Linuxes, if not 3. And then like some guy went and set up like this BSD team. And there's a lot of like kind of corporate like weird, like, oh, we're going to merge these 2 divisions. And then like this VP is going to go and take over this thing so that he can shut it down and move the resources over to his. And it was like kind of 4-dimensional chess with like offices and teams and operating systems. And it's just like, isn't there someone in the head office who's like made a decision? Or
yeah, that sounds like a CEO thing.
Kind of like not that great at software strategy, it turns out. But actually, it's a completely different. I mean, you see this with car manufacturers now. Like, you know, Tesla have turned the whole kind of car discussion into like, okay, we have a battery and a motor and then a computer, and everything else is software. Yeah,
Tesla's not a car company. They just happen to put software in a car. The real car companies can make
on wheels.
Like, when Tesla, you know, brought out their car and made electric cars like actually popular, then the real car companies can come in and actually make a car. Tesla just gets everyone like interested in it.
Yeah, but the same thing happens to Nokia, that basically all of their hardware, like different, you know, form factors and shapes and buttons and switches and all of that stuff was just rendered completely irrelevant because the entire discussion was moved to this is now a slab of glass and everything is about the software.
Wait,
2000? And they were just not ready for that.
I just realized 2005. That's like what, 2? How many years before the iPhone? Like 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So we were. We were part of the like Rebel Alliance inside Nokia, trying to like make some actually good software come out and be relevant
Right.
before Nokia just tripped over their own shoelaces getting out of bed in the morning. But ultimately, the shoelaces won because Nokia had just tied themselves up so horrifically badly internally. You know, they multiple, like 3 different versions of Symbian, right? You know, Series 60, Series 80, Series 90, another OS, 2 Linux OS, something else, and you know, just no coherence with making decisions about what to do and what not to do with the software. And you know, obviously, we felt, and the team inside Nokia, they built a really amazing team with you know, international collaborators and contractors and open source people, and you know, it was a really cool place and time to be. But you could kind of see how different that was to the way that the rest of Nokia worked, and it just didn't feel like something that would last. So our priority at Collabora was trying to sort of use our skills kind of, you know, overlapping between the open source world and the corporate world. What were they trying to do, and kind of deliver the kind of weird open source thing in a way that companies could get their head around. It wasn't really a question of whether they wanted to use open source, because they got that from an economic perspective. Like, someone else has written it for us and we can take it and we can save money. It was more to do with like actually delivering successfully. So being able to kind of understand roadmaps, influence things, work upstream, and kind of get the kind of mid to long-term efficiencies of making good decisions. We had some very interesting contracts over the time. I mean, we actually had to fire one of our clients, which was a large Korean device manufacturer.
Okay. I think we can guess some.
They make a number of devices, including lots of phones.
I think we can work this way.
They had a version of GTK that they like forked and been working on for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, with just a number of misapprehensions about how computers worked. And they came to us as like, we want to do open source. Can you upstream this? Like, I'm going to go with a no. Could you explain why you did this and what you were trying to achieve? And then we'll take it from there. And then it was like, okay, we'll write you a report about what we think you were trying to do. And then we can write you a proposal about maybe just doing that again. But yeah, so this kind of throwing engineers at it, and like, there were these things like the kind of Limo conference, Linux in mobile, and there was some VP for Motorola, and she would fly in and she would give the exact same presentation, and she would fly out again. She's like, yeah, we love Linux, we love open source, we've got 2,500 developers in our Bangalore office, woo, Linux. And I'm like, you'd think they'd send in a few more patches if they've got 2,000 people working on it, because I didn't see any, actually, which is remarkable. And you see how well that, you know, efficient and on-point software strategy worked for Motorola. Right?
Oh yeah. I don't even know what that company's doing. So the last time I paid attention to like Nokia and Motorola, they were making it was when there was some Windows phones coming out.
Motorola got acquired by Google for like 20 cents.
Yeah, Motorola, I think, makes...
Nokia got acquired by Microsoft.
Yeah, they were doing the Microsoft phones for a while, and then the Windows phones, and then Motorola makes like mid-range Android phones that are just basically shipping... It's basically like the cheap Pixel. That's what it is. It just ships like a stock Android.
Mid-range Pixels. Yeah.
Yeah,
Although I don't even know if they're doing that. I don't know if they've just become.
Yeah, I don't know. I've not paid attention to them for a while. I did have a Motorola.
They were like Nokia. They had a product roadmap that had like 6,000 different handsets, and this one is for, you know, mid to high end mobile professionals on Tuesdays, and like this one is the same except it has a flippy gizmo, and this one has a slightly longer antenna, and then you have different sales teams who have different targets and different geographies and things. And like, how does anyone like even understand this? And it turns out that Google acquired them and like, we're going to make a phone.
Yep.
Like, wow, mind blown.
Yeah, crazy about that, isn't it? You simplify your product stack, people are actually going to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not fight with themselves over who gets the cornflakes at breakfast, but yeah.
It sounds like
companies for you.
It sounds like there was a lot of like sort of not made here syndrome between the departments where like each of them wanted to be the one that did it, but then someone would come in and they would be the one who wants to do it, and then someone else would move stuff around. It just all
Yeah,
tries
yeah.
to like devour itself.
Yeah, and it's essentially, well, software engineering has a lot to answer for, because even just the term suggests that it's a kind of purely sort of analytical and mathematical kind of empirical process. But the reality is that your kind of social design of how your organization is structured and how you communicate and how you set targets and measure them and things is reflected in the software that you produce. It's probably more like coral or something, right? It grows and it
More
leaves shell
metaphors.
behind.
Okay, here we go.
I'm sorry, I'm terrible with
No,
metaphors.
it's fine.
But,
Go on. Let's see where this one goes.
but the way that the organism works reflects the environment it creates and leaves behind.
Right.
So if it grows this way or it grows this shape, then that's the shape of the shell. And then the growing is here and whatever. So if you have like a really weird organization structure, or you set goals in a really weird way and you don't invest in certain ways, then you end up with also really weird software that reflects it. So you have, this kind of fragility, or you're not ready for requirements to change. And so big companies which have these really complicated structures kind of stamp those really complicated structures on the software that they make. I think it's Conways Law. Don't quote me, but check on Wikipedia. But it's basically like the software architecture will reflect the organizational architecture.
Yes, Conways Law
that creates it. And Nokia was like a worked example of Conway's Law. That like, some of my most profitable days as a consultant would be like in Helsinki, and they'd be like, have this conversation, and like, you already have a team who's working on solving this problem. They are 3 doors that way. Let's go and talk to them. And we're like, wow, we have an API for single sign-on. Yes. Yeah. Meet UC. He's the single sign-on team. You want to log on, he can hook you up. Let's do that. I'm like, my work here is done. And in a sense, like and that was Samsung's problem as well, except like tenfold. They would approach things with this massive hierarchy, and there would be like a guy whose job was to write the software for the button widget,
right?
And like he would maintain the button, and like, well, you can't really, if you've pre-selected the way that your organization architecture works and your software architecture, you can't like tappable button. Like, I know that's a different person. We need to restructure the team or whatever. So this is really weird.
Yeah, what happens when that guy leaves?
Right. No more buttons.
No more buttons.
Yeah. So lots of really strange kind of organizational dynamics. And in a sense, that was the thing that we could see being these kind of outside consultants. And I think that's something that we were trying to do a lot, is kind of have a bigger conversation with customers that wasn't just about their software and the open source and things. It was more to do with the way that they approached engineering internally, and the way that they aligned that with the way that open source software and the community process and governance and things worked outside. So in a sense, more to do with kind of strategy, and from the strategy, how you can then effectively set up the tools and the team to succeed and to be efficient, and be ready for the kind of business conditions to change as well. But not all customers wanted that. They if you were talking to a software person, they wanted to buy some software or buy some services, and then you end up in those situations I was describing earlier. And like, this is going nowhere. I mean, we'll do the job, we'll give you the code, and best of luck kind of thing. But
so obviously, like what you're doing now at EndlessOS is very different from what you're doing when you were doing that work at Collabora. But I would imagine that seeing how these organizations are structured has given you some insight on like what you don't want to do being in that like management leadership position.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because it's easy to point fun at others, but
sure.
It's also pretty hard to set up the the right conditions for success. I mean, that's kind of the art of management, is basically, if you're good at it, it looks like you're not doing anything.
Right.
Because in a sense, you've got the team set up, and you've got the team that you need. They have everything they need. They've got clear inputs and outputs and goals, and then they are empowered to go and solve all of the things that they need to solve. And so if you kind of get everything around the edge, all the interfaces and all of the those things well defined, then the team is then able to organize themselves. And we're having a sort of an experiment at the moment in Endless, because we have had this problem of we had a larger team when we were Endless Mobile, kind of for profit, and we had to reduce the team size because we had less funding as a non-profit. And obviously these are all really horrible situations, but we kind of end up with like, okay, we now have one person who really knows how this component or this software works. And now that team that used to be 7 people is now 4 people. And actually, if you give 3 or 4 goals to that team of 3 or 4 people, then everyone is working on a separate thing. And you kind of lose some of this idea of the team coming together and working on the organization goals and sort of solving all those things. So we have an experiment now, which was actually the idea of Daniel Drake, who's our engineering VP, that we would actually put all of our projects on hold apart from one of them. Right. And well, to the greatest extent, as on hold as you can get, given that we've got customers that need to maintain stuff, or whatever, but have the entire team in terms of development working on one product altogether. So we're doing that for 6 months. So we're in our first semester of working on Endless Key with the whole team. So we have kind of a platform with an OS team, and we have like an apps, kind of more of a kind of UI user-facing experience team. And they're both working on Endless Key, sort of the build system, the infrastructure, the content recommendations, the presentation, the UI, the design. And that's an experiment we're doing at the moment to try and kind of allow people to go and understand our priorities at a higher level, but then to solve some of the micro detail themselves, because that gives them the opportunity to research and to choose how things are done. And if you do too much kind of centralized planning, then you end up kind of taking away people's opportunity to, I guess, feel ownership in what they're doing. If it's just like a task comes off the queue and you do something, then you're kind of just in a kind of conveyor belt situation, right? You're not able to kind of exercise some of that creativity and problem solving. So we're trying to provide more high level context and less kind of micro detail, and kind of give away some of the planning and let the team sort of have more involvement in choosing their tasks and priorities and the way that they approach things.
That, sadly, that was a really good speech you went on, but I was having some connection issues during that. It's like a good portion of it just got completely cut out, which is really... If I could get Google Meet to have like set up working properly, I would have loved to use that. But I'll see what I can salvage from that. Hopefully that works.
You can hear to go back and answer the question again.
No, you could hear it was fine most of the way, but there was a couple of points in there where it got a little bit staticky. I think it was still, you could still follow along with it, but yeah, Jitsi can be a bit rough sometimes. That's why I tend... It's sort of like my backup of the backups. Whatever. Tech, as I said earlier, I hate computers. They're awful.
Yeah, so my wife is a human resources director, and then we have some evenings when just like, computers are terrible, like I hate computers, and she's like, people are terrible, I hate people. Like, swap? Okay.
Oh no! You know what? You can keep the. I'll take the tech. You can keep the people.
It turns out if you're trying to make big software, you just have to do both.
So one thing we didn't get super into was the stuff with you on the GNOME board. What does the GNOME board actually do?
I'm just like, oh no, rumbled. No, there's kind of some obvious legal stuff. So the directors, so every nonprofit is a corporation. The directors of the corporation are responsible for making sure that the resources are being used appropriately. We talk about fiduciary duty, stuff like looking at the budget, deciding how much money we've got, how much money we're going to spend. I think more more specifically, it's to do with the organization strategy and priorities. So there's a staff team. We're in the process of recruiting for a new executive director. So we re-advertised the role actually last week. So if anyone knows any non-profity leadery people who understand open source, please do get in touch. But there's a team of sort of 5 or 6 staff members who work for the foundation with different responsibilities, and the board should be kind of agreeing with them basically what the foundation should focus on, the best ways for us to support the GNOME community, the best ways for us to get the message of GNOME and free software and the open source desktop and get that out into the world. So it's kind of holding the organization to account that we are doing good things with the money and the resources, in a sense, entrusted to us by the community and the donors that support the foundation. And making sure that there's a reasonable plan that translates from dollars in the bank accounts to stuff that we do and why we think that's the right thing to do to promote the mission and to support the project and the organization.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. I have things on here. I thought I was going to be able to lead that into something. I didn't think this through too far.
I mean, but day to day, when I look at GNOME stuff, it's not to do with recruiting ED. I'm admittedly pushing my pet project, which is to stand up FlatHub into a slightly separate organization.
Okay.
But partly because we're working on adding donations and payments into FlatHub.
Yes.
Which changes some of the we need to have a Stripe account, we need to collect sales taxes, and there's some different like legal responsibilities and liabilities. And there is a small, very small, but there is a small chance that we would sell lots and lots of proprietary software on FlatHub, and it would end up doing something that was no longer consistent with the mission of the GNOME Foundation.
Right.
So having it in a separate legal structure, so we're thinking FlatHub LLC basically allows us to basically protect the GNOME Foundation by moving FlatHub into a separate corporation or selling it or donating it to the Linux Foundation or whatever. It gives us options to kind of separate the what FlatHub is doing from what GNOME is doing. So in a sense, kind of GNOME is incubating FlatHub, and we can provide some of our resources and help infrastructure, sysadmin, and kind of legal structure. But FlatHub has enough autonomy that we can have our own kind of governance process. So we're looking at having like a little advisory board or sort of governing board that brings together GNOME and KDE to choose and sort of FlatHub representatives, so that we can sort of choose how FlatHub spends its money and what we prioritize, rather than it being just a GNOME thing or just a KDE thing, but it's actually a separate organization that has its own kind of governance and transparency. Hopefully not elections, try and figure out something that's a little easier, but at least so that who's making the decisions and you can see what they thought about and why. And then once we've got that legal structure, it gives us, we can set up the agreements to upload stuff to FlatHub and what that means in terms of collecting payments. And if you need to demand a refund or whatever, like all of those things we can set up, to and from this separate legal entity. So it creates a bit of kind of back office work, but it protects the GNOME Foundation from doing something that's a bit different to what we're currently doing. I mean, ultimately, we're doing it because the likely case and what we hope will happen is this improves the quality of software and availability of software for the free and open source desktop. So we think it's a good thing having more apps, and that's not a GNOME thing. That's a whole kind of Linux community thing, which is why we're working in partnership with KDE to set it up. And it's my sentence is just completely gone. Yep. It's not just tech problems today. It's also out of brain error. So being able to set it up as a partnership and being able to promote those things, we think will be beneficial for users and developers, and also just trying to open some new economic models. So the GNOME Foundation has done a lot of work on diversity and inclusion and trying to remove barriers of entry to our community, and just this idea of being able to kind of work on free and open source software and have it kind of help to pay your bills. So I'm not saying it's the answer and it's going to work straight away, but at least being able to say we're opening the door to more people if there are ways for people to to charge money or get donations, or we're giving the options of economic models. Exactly which will be the winning option, or what people choose, or how developers will use it. We're trying to not sort of tell people exactly how they should use it. We're trying to give controls out so that people could kind of run their own experiments and kind of open up that conversation with their users and with the community. That's trying to not make money a sort of bad word, and actually say more people can do this and more people can develop software that solves their problems if we give them options to also could have put a roof over their head or pay the broadband bill.
Yeah, monetization of FOSS is one of these things that's it's been a challenge since the existence of FOSS. Basically, like there are a couple of these companies that make it work, but most of them that make it work either do paid development work for and have some corporate contracts. They have they offer support like Red Hat. Actually, those are the two major models that work. When we're talking on the smaller scale, we're talking donations, and nowadays you have recurring donation platforms like Patreon, Coffee, things like that, GitHub sponsors. But actually having a model that is sustainable it's difficult, because as much as a lot of people in the free software space like to say, it's free as in freedom, not free as in beer, there is a lot of people that also do treat it as free as in beer and they don't want to give any money at all. It's, this is just out there, I'm going to have it. So it's definitely a challenge that needs to be dealt with in some way. I'm not the person to deal with it, that's for sure. But
I mean, but no software is free, right? Someone pays for it in their time. Sure. And in most places, that means that there's a cost to their time, or there's a lost opportunity cost to their time, if we're talking in sort of cold-hearted capitalist terms. But there are lots of people who find free and open source software exactly because it's free, because that's the option that gives them the applications they need without having to pirate something or use kind of crack copies or whatever. It allows them to engage with technology in a more meaningful way. And so the trade-off is, there are people who could easily pay for software and do.
I don't want to make something clear. There's definitely people out there that don't have the resource to pay for software, and that's I think it's great those people actually have access to software, but
and that's really important to preserve.
Absolutely.
Whilst over here there are some people who have in a sense a surplus, they could pay for the software, and how do you kind of find a model that allows us to reallocate this surplus to the people who make the software without making the software inaccessible to the people who don't have a surplus, and they really need that software to be free for them. And so it's kind of balancing those two things, and I think it's tricky, right? Because in a sense, free software, as opposed to open source, is intentionally, it's counterculture, it's individualistic. It's designed to preserve individual freedoms against the big company that will come and steal your stuff and make it proprietary and run it on a web service and steal your data and then rent it back to you and train the AI models on it, and all of these hypothetical things definitely don't happen.
Never happen.
So I think, one hope I have is that the GNOME Foundation, and the fact that we are a kind of well-established non-profit, a kind of trusted community. Everyone knows GNOME within the free and open source space, and so we can say, okay, this is someone I can trust to take a position on this and actually talk about moving money around, but actually we'll kind of give them some space to figure this out and to be a trusted actor in the space, rather than a corporation trying to give me all the apps and give me all the money. Wah. I don't know who that could be, but so just being a neutral actor in the space and saying, well, we're doing this because we think it's beneficial for these people who are excluded on financial terms, and we think it's beneficial for our kind of shared values and mission to make cool software and get it out to more people, and do that with freedom and trust built in.
Think what you're trying to speak. The whole App Store thing that the Flatpak could here we go. Okay, we're gonna think of this one through. I've got a lot of things going through my head right now. I have seen some people concerned over what Flatpak could possibly become if it wasn't this like neutral entity where, it could become like a lockdown app store, like, the Microsoft store, like, app stores that are out there. I think that's definitely a concern that people will have with something like this existing, especially as you are bringing in, these monetization systems. Obviously, the goal is to be open about everything's happening. The goal is to be this platform for free and open source software and also proprietary software to be distributed out to the users. But that idea of neutrality, I think, it's very important to like have as that key focus, because, as I was saying, we're going in a loop now.
Yeah. Wait, so what if FlatHub turned evil?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. It's 1 a.m. right now. My brain's starting to fall apart.
Well, I mean, that's part of the point of establishing it as a non-profit.
Exactly.
And establishing some governance. So who's behind it, and in a sense, why they're making the decisions they're making. I mean, there's too much about FlatHub now, which is like, Rob thinks we should go this way. Right? And that's not a sustainable model. That's a good way to start things. It's not a good way to run things. And there's too much kind of dead reckoning, and that's something we started doing at the Linux App Summit this year, is focus groups and actually having a conversation with app developers and understanding what was important to them. But ultimately, like, if FlatHub turns evil, then FlatHub will fail, right? Sure. Because it's a matter of maintaining the trust between the developers and the users. And
the concern is that it's this platform that becomes really big and then it turns evil. Like, it just becomes evil now. That's sort of where, obviously, it's like I read too many weird takes from people on the internet. You have better things to do with your time. My entire business is looking at dumb people saying dumb things about Linux. I'm sure you got better things to do than worry about that stuff.
I don't know. I maybe made this poor joke at some point when I was standing for board election, but if I was part of some evil, like, Microsoft or Google conspiracy to take over the Linux desktop, you would think after 20 years they would have called it in. Or, if it is a conspiracy, it's a really poorly run one.
Maybe that's what they want you to think.
Well, yeah. I mean, the check didn't arrive yet. I don't know. No, I think that's why the transparency and the trust is the important thing, because I don't think a community that's based on shared values and what we're trying to achieve doesn't work if there isn't trust.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to kind of build and communicate. And the reason that I'm here talking about this is so that people understand, well, who is Rob and why is he doing these things with FlatHub, and should I, care about FlatHub, or should I trust it, or what can I rely on FlatHub to do? And just being clear about the decisions we're making and why we're making them. And in a sense, if there are things we don't know or things that we might screw up, then that's a shared journey we can go on together. Like we heard really clearly in the Linux App Summit that there were a few people in the room who said, I will never require a payment to download my application because I do not want to make it not accessible to people. And also because it's free and open source, if I don't give people the best version from FlatHub, they'll get a worse version from somewhere else. They'll get the version from the distro from 18 months ago or whatever. So I actually want people to get this version. And they were much more interested in being able to, this kind of Patreon, this supporter model, and people, kind of donating, not buying the software that had already been written, but kind of supporting and contributing to the next version, and maybe, helping to prioritize features, or just being part of a community that kind of buys into this software and what it lets you do. And so we had that kind of pretty clear feedback. So I don't know what we would make evil in that. If we jack our fees up, somebody will make not FlatHub, right? We don't have these kind of platform surpluses to kind of play people off against each other in the same way that's that social networks and search engines and advertisers have. Cory Doctorow has these kind of blog posts and things. He's talking about in-shitification. And this is basically like, once you have all the users, then you can basically, squeeze down the advertisers. And once you have all the advertisers, then you can squeeze down the users. And basically the experience gets worse and worse and worse for everyone in the ecosystem, because the switching costs are really high. And literally all the software we've produced for FlatHub and all of the infrastructure, even the like OpenShift like recipes, like if you have your own Kubernetes cluster, you can stand up your own FlatHub by copying and pasting what we have, and then you have not FlatHub, RoundHub. I don't know. So we don't have surpluses that we are like grabbing and then playing people off against each other. Like the preconditions for us to be evil and become evil and remain evil are like just not there.
Right.
There's no incentive for us to do that, and there's no way that we could succeed in doing that over time because people would just stop using it.
Now, one legitimate concern with monetization is, okay, so we're talking about like, say, the GIMP developers, they have the Flatpak and they're like, we want to monetize the Flatpak. That's a pretty simple idea. Like, they should be able to monetize the Flatpak. But where it gets weird is when you have, not really like a fork of a project, it's just a third-party package of Flatpak. Do you have that person able to monetize that Flatpak? Like, even though they're not the developers of the project, but they're the developers of the Flatpak? Should they need to have some sort of relationship with the project? Like, how does this sort of need, like, how do you think this should be handled?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we developed and launched the verification features that have just come online a couple of months ago, when we kind of switched over the internet's worst kept secret, the beta FlatHub site, now actually on flathub.org. And that verification process will be a requirement before you can access any donations or payment features. And so whoever's logged into the kind of FlatHub developer console needs to then show that they are also a developer involved in this software.
Right.
That's done from a sort of computer level. That's done with domain names and GitHub or GitLab accounts. GitHub and GitLab accounts. And it's not even 1 a.m. for me. It's just Tuesday. There's also layers on top of that, obviously, like what name the application has, what icon it has. And so we are working on, as a prerequisite to turning on any kind of payment or donation features, we will also, if you change the description or the icon of the application, it will go into a review queue, and at least initially a human being will look at it and say, yes, this is still the GIMP, or like, actually, no, this is not the GIMP, and just do some eyeballing and make sure that that's we're making representations to the users about, yes, this is verified and this is actually who you think it is. Because those problems are pretty hard to solve otherwise. There isn't really another kind of empirically true fact other than like someone who made this software uploaded it to FlatHub. Obviously that software is going to be a patchwork quilt that could be a fork of this other one. Minecraft launchers seem to have like a whole subsection that they kind of fork pretty much constantly. My son has, we had to move from PolyMC. That was like unheard of.
That was a fun one.
PrismMC is,
that story.
Right. I just caught up with that, but I realized
Lenny joined my Discord a while ago. That was fun. He doesn't like me.
I had some emails.
He definitely doesn't like me. Because there wasn't much coverage like outside of the Linux space, but I was like one of the channels that sort of covered it in the FOSS sort of context, and I went deep. I dug up everything that was going on with this project, and yeah, man, that was a fun time. I miss that. I miss that experience.
We still get emails sort of like, why are you shipping this? And it's like, it's terrible. You should redirect people. And like, he controls the domain. There's not much we can do about that. So it is what it is. We can't get in play on everything unless like it's a DMCA takedown request or someone's copyright is being violated. And it's unfortunate because it kind of underlines the need to worry about some of these more kind of tedious details, things like fiscal sponsorship, who owns your trademarks, how are they licensed, those kind of things. I mean, when projects get to a certain size, got a number of developers and things, you need to think a little bit about those legal structures. And so, but there's lots of organizations to choose from. I mean, with my GNOME hat on, I've been looking at how can we sort of formalize? So we launched the GNOME Circle initiative sort of 2 or 3 years back, and it's one of the things that one of the quite cool things that I think I've done on the GNOME board was kind of help to sort of create that and start it. And it's just been really cool to see. I think it's like 70, 80 like really neat applications coming in and forming this kind of wider community of developers and apps around the core GNOME desktop experience. And so we've been looking at how do we start to offer maybe things like donations, handling and fiscal sponsorship stuff, basically like legal support or trademarks or those things, so that we actually extend like a bigger umbrella out to those projects. But there's lots of great nonprofits in the space that will do that as well. So you can use Open Collective if you just want a website to like take some donations and things. But there are others that will go out and enforce the GPL on your behalf, like Conservancy and folks in between, like SPI, who'll sort of keep a bank account and reimburse expenses and things. So there's lots of different options that are available to set up the legal structure to go with your projects. I kind of have a secret, well, it won't be secret anymore, but my hope is that we can integrate between FlatHub and Open Collective.
Okay.
Because one of the problems that we have with FlatHub using Stripe is there's basically a list of countries that Stripe likes.
Yeah.
And if you're in one of the countries that Stripe likes, then you can set up your account and you can receive payments and yada, yada. And like the EU is there, UK, US, Australia, whatever. It's just not very representative of the global South. And, even as a US nonprofit, and that's, GNOME or Endless, even just wire transferring to Brazil or India or something creates, and that's a lot of people, right? That's it creates really big barriers just for kind of compliance and taxes and treasury controls and all of this stuff. And actually being able to hold the money on behalf of a project, and then they can reimburse expenses or buy equipment or reimburse airfares or whatever. That obviously opens it up and makes it a lot more flexible for how people can actually make use of these donations and payment stuff.
Even if you just forget about like the whole worldwide thing, just the different states in the US that all handle taxes completely differently.
Yes. Yeah. Stripe handles that very well. You can tick a button and Stripe, you put your tax codes in. And if it's business software or entertainment software, or if it's downloaded or if it's on a disk or whatever, you tell Stripe all of that. There's actually a bit in the FlatHub web app that basically tries to infer tax codes from desktop file descriptions. Like, this is a game, we'll give it this tax code. This is productivity software, we'll give it this tax code. And then so that we can actually put the right tax codes in, and then it will collect the right sales tax, and then it will generate the right.
And you don't get a letter from the US tax collection agency.
Yes. I mean, you normally get 50K or 100K that you can do before having to do any sales tax filings.
Right.
So we can keep an eye on it and see, like, if it goes like really, popular in Nevada, we might have to file sooner. Actually, I think Nevada has no sales tax, but anyway. Yay. Stripe does that for you.
Yeah. So the Open Collective thing, you're going to talk about the potential partnership between that.
Yeah, so there is an API, so you can, it might just be more work to do on the FlatHub side, but I kind of quite like a way, if you're a developer and you can kind of sign up and say, look, I've already got this Open Collective, then kind of attach the app and the Open Collective together so that donations go into your collective. Collective. Because then if you're in one of the GNOME directors is in Paraguay, and it's really hard to send money to Paraguay, and he's like, I'd like to collect donations for Flat Seal. This is Martin. And he could set up an Open Collective, and then he could collect donations of that seal, and they would stay in the US. They'd be collected from wherever they are, and they go to the US, and then he could reimburse expenses, or submit invoices or whatever best supports the project. So I think it just opens up economic opportunities for people to kind of handle their project expenses and donations in a better way.
Yeah, like also it just brings everything together. Like the problem with having this is a problem that I have with managing my stuff. I have my YouTube AdSense, I have my Patreon, I have my LiberaPay, I have this, I have that. And dealing with all of these different things is kind of a nightmare. If you can have everything going to one thing, that is so much easier to manage.
Yeah. I have this idea. I mean, I thought about some LiberaPay as well. Like, can we, if you've got supporter content in FlatHub, how do we kind of passport from another system to let you access the supporter content that you put in FlatHub? So can you like pair your FlatHub account with your like Libero account so that if someone registers their app, then we recognize that they're a contributor there and they let you access the supporter stuff in FlatHub. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that would be cool. It's on the list. I wouldn't say it's near the top of the list, but it would be like an interesting thing to look at. Or could we add that as a payment option and then we'd integrate, in both directions? Because I think that's important. I think, FlatHub knowing which applications that you use, that could be cool. You could like just download and install all the Flatpaks that you want on a new system. And then knowing which ones you're a supporter of, whether you support them on FlatHub or you support them on a different platform. I think that's kind of a nice goal to look towards. It's a ways off. Yeah, we'll just need to take the steps that we have for this year, and maybe that's a next year roadmap.
First goal is getting the monetization stuff set up and ready for everyone to use. Then you can go from there. Yeah.
I think the next thing we'll do is the direct uploads, because that actually we don't have to wait for the legal setup and some of the kind of paperwork stuff and lawyers.
That's more of just a moderation problem. Then you got to make sure that things are being dealt with if they are, shouldn't be on FlatHub. They're maybe not malware, but just like other things that you need to deal with.
Yeah, there's some automated checking and things that the build bot currently does. So folks who upload directly, which I think is GNOME, KDE, the Free Desktop SDK, OBS, and Firefox.
Okay, sure.
They basically bypass a bunch of checking that the build bot does, and we're moving those checks into the repo manager, so that if you get a token to upload, then that kind of automated checking and potentially manual checking still happens for everything that goes in. And we kind of want to set up some transparency in terms of where stuff is built. So, not just having a binary off your laptop and then uploading it, but actually like, okay, can you please show us where this was built? Is it a CI flow? Is it a GitHub action? Can you please link to where this was built so people can go and see the logs and they understand basically what's the supply chain? Obviously not from like 100% guaranteed thing, but at least being able to show some transparency of where things are being uploaded from. So we don't want to lose that, because at least on FlatHub currently, that the source is in GitHub, it goes through the build bot, and then it goes into FlatHub. So you can like find where it came from and what was built. So we kind of don't want to lose that property when we sort of open up to different build systems. But equally, we have to open up to different build systems because it's pretty much impossible to make Electron or Rust or Python, where you just get into a big argument between one build system and the Flatpak build system. And you can do it, but the number of people who can and want to do it is like 5.
With the transparency of the builds, doesn't that get a bit weird when we're talking about proprietary applications being packaged?
Oh yeah, all bets are off. Like proprietary application, binary from space, you either trust them or you don't. Sure. I'm mostly thinking about not sort of turning the free and open source applications into that. Right. So it's like, oh, it's just a binary from someone's laptop, and apparently this is the source code to it, but I have no way of knowing. Right. We would still like to lean FlatHub towards things being kind of built in public infrastructure that we can actually then see the build process that was used. So some of that is a little bit of social pressure of like, okay, can you please link to the build logs, and FlatHub will link to them, and there'll be a metadata field in the app stream so it can go into KDE Discover or GNOME software. Actually, maybe not build logs, but at least that it's recorded with each build, and give people, this is the GitHub action, copy paste this. That's a great way to build an Electron app, and this is how you should build it and upload it, and maybe try and upstream some of those things so that it becomes really easy to have a recommended flow of how to get a Rust app into FlatHub. And if you follow these steps, people can see that you're following these steps, and they can see it running on a kind of inspectable system. Right.
Huh. So what right now? What is the process of actually getting an app onto FlatHub? Because I have no idea about that.
So it's basically a GitHub pull request. So
Okay.
you can make a branch and you send it into the FlatHub. There's a FlatHub/FlatHub repository, and your Flatpak manifest and kind of any metadata and stuff gets reviewed by a team of basically 2 or 3 people who are absolute heroes. Thank you, Hubert. Thank you, Bart. Basically just keeping everything flowing, and just checking that the permissions are sane, the description is not terrible, the icons and screenshots and some of those things. So some of it is a little bit technical checking, and just following best practices and how the Flatpak is put together. And some of it is then kind of metadata and descriptions and making sure that it will show up properly and it will work properly in the web app and the different software centers. So after a bit of checking, then basically a bot will take that branch and just make it into a new repository.
Right.
And so each Flatpak, the ones that aren't direct uploaded, has its own repository on GitHub. And then you can just see the kind of commit history, and there's a build bot that will pick up basically each commit or pull request. It will do a build, either a sort of production build or a scratch build. And you can test it, and they'll tell the build bot to publish it.
Okay, simple enough. One last thing I do want to get into that we didn't touch on is the one other hat you wear, your the newest hat, the Open UK stuff.
Oh yeah, actually, I'm on sabbatical at the moment from Open UK.
Okay.
Just for the 6-month period. There's a lot of family stuff going on towards the end of last year, so this is one thing too many.
Yeah.
That's Open UK was really small and not doing a lot kind of 3 or 4 years ago. And Amanda Bock kind of joined us as the CEO and kind of took a real leap into it with both feet and said, okay, well, what can we do to actually bring together? There's a lot of open source like development and technology and open hardware and open data. And there's a lot of stuff and innovation happening in the UK, but there isn't really one place that people can go to kind of come up with a strategy, come up with one voice, come up with, what should we tell the government about open data, or what should we do to try and improve the economic opportunities, or stem the losses from Brexit, or these kind of things. Like, what does it mean to set a good digital strategy? So just creating those forums to bring together sort of people looking at policy, people looking at education. Like, can people learn about open source in school, or can they study open source in college? What else is going on? There's definitely a very active policy group. There's an active education group, which includes some museum stuff. And a big theme over the past year or two has been sustainability as well. So kind of trying to align at least kind of advocate for why open source and open hardware designs and open data and energy data and things can actually help move the economy to a more sustainable place in terms of kind of climate impacts and equality of access, those things. So kind of using Open UK as a kind of a sort of focal point of working groups to kind of advocate for those things like blueprints for a greener data center.
You wear a lot of hats.
There's lots of stuff going on there.
You definitely...
And I'm not doing a lot of that. There is a very great board and team and many, many volunteers and organizations involved in the Open UK. I was for a while the chair, and I handed that over just because there were, as you say, slightly too many hats.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Keep an eye on that. I'm hoping to get back into it, but we'll see how the year unfolds. I have 4 kids.
Yeah.
So
we can definitely hear them in the background a couple of times throughout the episode.
Yeah, they didn't come in.
No, that's good. No, I think that's really cool. So they weren't. You said they weren't really doing too much before, like a couple of years back.
It's been just a really impressive kind of reboot, and just really bringing together. Kind of, there's some reports going on. Actually, if you're involved in an organisation that uses open source, there is a reports questionnaire survey thing. That is not a very coherent sentence. There's been an annual report that Open UK has been doing about state of open and the UK's part in the kind of open source landscape. And there's huge, like, disproportionate percentage, like per capita or per head or whatever, open source innovation and development done in the UK. and just looking at what's the size of that community and that kind of corporate space, and what does it mean for the economy. I jinxed it. Good.
So good. I was waiting for something to happen. I'm surprised it took that long.
Me too. I mean, we have our nanny here. My wife works full time as well, so yeah, it is legit hard to look after 4 kids. They age between 3 and 9.
I am not surprised whatsoever. I don't have kids myself, but I do have some family members that have kids around that same age, and yeah, it seems like they have a lot of fun dealing with that.
Anyway, so UK viewers and listeners, if you use open source software in the UK, Open UK would be very appreciative if you could have a look for our State of Open 2023 survey and input into our 3rd report about open source, open hardware, and open data in the UK. Yes,
go and do that. So, with all the different hats you wear, all of the management sort of stuff you do nowadays, how often do you manage to do you even try to get involved in the weeds of getting involved in projects now? Is it more just doing your higher level stuff? I looked at your GitHub and I saw a bit. There's a bit of stuff in there.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely remember a point when I sort of I try and still use Linux and play around with stuff enough that I understand what's going on technically, so I don't just sort of turn up and just spout complete nonsense.
Right, you don't want to be one of those managers that are
talking about looks great on PowerPoint and then doesn't actually work in reality. So I try and kind of maintain enough detail and that's either hands-on or by working on stuff with the team or talking through and so I still read code, I still look at what's going on, I still run my own mail server, I still use WeChat. I don't know. I mostly got my head around Docker. Kubernetes is still a deep mystery. So I try and do enough technical stuff that I know what's going on in enough detail that I can kind of sit across these different worlds of understanding what's going on sort of technically in the desktop and just in its space generally. And bring that into the different kind of conversations I'm having. So if I'm looking at strategy or kind of product investment or those things, making those decisions for Endless, then I kind of know what's likely to work or not work, or what is a useful direction to consider.
Right.
And so I sort of have that kind of CTO-ish input into what we're doing in Endless. And for GNOME, obviously the same thing is true. I don't think the GNOME Foundation and its directors would kind of maintain the engagement, trust, respect of the GNOME community if we were just going off talking some whatever, non-profit free software stuff, and it didn't actually come down to, well, how does this affect the project and how does this help the GNOME desktop and GNOME Circle and these things? So being able to sort of stay grounded in the technology, but then actually look at how to apply that and to kind of improve the impact and the reach of what we're doing. So yeah, I try and keep it real a little bit, but I don't have a lot of spare time for that. So it's just sort of here and there from time to time.
But yeah, it's always weird when you see those people that are in the management positions and they're talking about something as if it's still 10, 15 years ago, and they fully understand everything happening back then. But the current state, it's pipe wire? What's a pipe wire? What does that mean?
Yeah,
Wayland? What is Wayland? I've never heard of this thing.
Yeah. We'll try and keep track of that.
I think that's ultimately for the best. Because as you're saying, I think being in that CTO-ish position, I think is probably, how do I say this? I don't know what I'm trying to say actually. I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah. I'm not sure what I was trying to say there. We will.
It's a double-edged sword because I think if I do too much technology strategy or whatever, then I'm taking away the opportunity of my VP of engineering and those guys to kind of have input into our product and technology strategy. So I may sometimes I might weigh in on something, and sometimes I might kind of stay quiet and see,
Right.
what ideas come out. I often try and speak last in a meeting, so that I'm not sort of setting a direction of like, well, my boss's boss said this, so I'm going to stay quiet or whatever. And it's important to include and allow other people to get involved with their different approaches.
So obviously you like the position you're in, considering how many management positions you've taken on. Like, clearly you have a thing for management. But do you miss those days where you were like working in the weeds, getting there in the repos, doing all the hard work yourself?
Yes and no. It's a little bit. I really enjoy working together with people. And there is at some very, very base level, actually implementing a piece of technology just by itself can be quite a lonely thing. And in some ways, it can also just be like, person versus computer. Like, you have the idea, you solve the problem, and then the rest of it is just arguing with computer to make it happen. And it's actually the solving the problem and working with others to solve bigger and more complicated problems and stuff. That's the bit that I enjoy the most.
Right.
And there are other people who are much better at the other parts of it, the arguing with the computer and actually kind of making the software match the goal and the ideas. And so I'm kind of quite happy to live kind of vicariously and sort of join in the team, but not have to be the one that's writing the code. But I'm bringing different perspectives and different ideas. But I'm still part of that creative process and that problem solving and kind of direction setting and things. That's what I enjoy the most. I enjoy the BOFs and the conferences and those things, and our kind of internal planning meetings or offsites or whatever we do at Endless. Those things I really enjoy because I actually like working with people to figure stuff out and come up with ideas and kind of work together. So I miss it a little bit, and that's why I will kind of noodle around. But I'm equally I'm not as good at coding and operating a computer as I used to be. So I also just don't have a lot of time and patience to sit and debug some kind of gnarly stuff. I'm just like, this doesn't work. I'm just gonna have to set it aside and ask someone for help or just do something different. My son keeps me on my toes because he's like trying to load all these Minecraft mods and like set up a server with a plugin that lets the Nintendo Switch connect to it as well. All this stuff. So cool. I get like a little queue of sysadmin tasks coming from my 9-year-old. So
you have your mail server as well, so that keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, that works really well.
Yeah.
MailCow, it runs Docker Compose and a mail server pops out. It's amazing. It was basically like the mail server I was running, except completely automated. So I manually got Sogo and Postfix and Dovecart and blah, 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 blah. And then I looked around like, I need something that just does this for me. And MailCow basically had the mail system I was already running, but just like in a Docker container and with everything sorted out with a better UI. And like even I can get my head around that. So yeah, it was good.
Mail servers are something I'm good. I've got other things I'll spend my time on. But hey, if it's that easy, I might have to check it out.
Yeah, MailCow, I recommend it.
I've certainly considered it, but like every time I'd looked at like doing the mail server stuff, like all of the stuff I could find was like, do this and this and this and this and this and keep going and going and going.
File, copy paste this for like no reason.
Yeah, to be fair, it was like it was a couple of years back, so it was. It probably would have been before like Docker and stuff was really taking off and really becoming this like massive thing. Yeah, so I would imagine it's definitely a lot easier, right? Definitely a lot easier now.
Yeah. There are some that sort of take a computer and then just mangle the configuration file and install everything. And I wanted something that was a bit neater. So just having a mail system as a bunch of containers made sense to me. Well, it did all the spam and DKIM and SPF and whatever alphabet soup is necessary to actually receive an email or have Hotmail not spam filter you immediately. Yeah.
Well, I'm taking up a lot of your time. So I think we should probably start to wrap this up. It's been almost like we've been talking for about 2 hours, but it's been like hour 40 when recording this. Jeez.
Okay. A little bit of editing. I should let you get to bed as well. But
no,
it's been great fun.
Yeah. Well, what I usually do with the podcast is assuming there's nothing you want me to cut out, I upload the entire thing as like a block, and then I like cut out clips and then upload those as like a separate thing. So I'm sure I'll find some fun things that we can have as dedicated topics there. Yeah. So let people know where they can find you online, where if there's anything that you particularly want to like direct people towards. I know you mentioned the State of Open survey before, so that again, go check that out if you're in the UK.
Yeah, so my blog is where I post kind of the most interesting stuff that we're doing over at FlatHub. So that's rabq.net, or you can find it on Planet GNOME. And EndlessOS.org is the EndlessOS website, but in a sense, people watching your show are probably not necessarily the ones that need what Endless is doing. But go and donate to your favorite open source project. And say thank you to the developers. They really appreciate it.
Absolutely. That all you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, sweet. As for me, the main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Sometimes not Linux videos. Sometimes I'm talking about Instagram doing their activity pub thing where it connects into the Fediverse and does all that fancy stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah. If they actually do it. It's from like leaked marketing slides, so it could all just be nonsense. But I'm going to talk about it as if it's completely true, because that makes it more fun. I've got the gaming channel where I am playing through Yakuza 0 and... when is it right now? It's not towards the end of May. I'll be playing Final Fantasy 16 very soon, probably in like a week from when this comes out. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, the video version is available on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. And if you're watching the video version, you can find the podcast on any podcast platform. There is an RSS feed. Stick in your favorite app. I like AntennaPod. It's pretty good. And yeah, I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say? How do you want to end the show? I'd always put people on the spot.
Really? Free open source software is awesome. We have the opportunity to change the world and change the way that people interact with technology. So go out, tell your friends, support the creators and authors, and do what you can to be a kind and respectful advocate. We really appreciate everyone's support.
Awesome. Oh,
cool.
Sweet.
Thank you very much. It's been great. I'll let you get to sleep.